The fog ahead folded back, not blown by wind but drawn apart, split in trembling veils that yielded to something vast beneath the surface. The water darkened, an abyssal pulse rising, something too broad and slow for waves. The Ashen Grace shuddered as if felt by unseen hands. Gideon was first to see it. He froze, finger extended toward the bow where the sea churned. No shout came, his voice caught in his throat, thick as salt. "Gods!" Taran's whisper cracked into the silence, his lead line slipping free from his fingers. From the depths, shapes awoke, long, sinuous bodies that writhed in the gloom, great arms that sliced the water, masks of coral and barnacle shining beast-white in the low light. They surged upward, carrying themselves from the sea's grip onto timber. They did not arrive in ships. They crawled, they vaulted, they emerged. Althea moved to the rail, jaw set. "The crimson tide," she breathed. Vash's grip tightened on the wheel, eyes burning. "They came for what we took." A heavy hush fell over the deck, thick as the fog itself. Then came the sound, grapnels cutting through mist, cords snapping tight, the scrape of scaled limbs on wood. The sea's silence split. Things leapt. Shadows climbed over rails, limbs too many, tails coiling. The air filled with shrieks, steel drawn, and the deck buckled under the weight of horror. The Ashen Grace was no longer alone. The sea had given birth to its vengeance. The fog swirled with them, cloaking their movements until they were among the crew like wraiths from old sailors' tales. The first hooked over the stern rail, its limbs unnaturally long, claws sinking into the wood with a hiss. Another launched upward, tail coiled beneath it like a spring, landing on the deck with a sickening crunch. And then they rose. Pale, scaled torsos breaking the surface like knives through canvas, dozens of them, masked faces, spined tails, arms slick with seawater and barnacle armor. They climbed, slithered, ascended, grappling the Ashen Grace's hull like reef snakes drawn to blood. They did not come with war cries, no drums, no warning. Only the wet scrape of scaled hands on timber, and the sound of rope groaning as grapnels, enchanted or cursed, whistled from below and latched with unnatural precision. Then came the shrieks. Shadows leapt, not from ships, but from the sea itself. The Ashen Grace was under siege by ghosts of the deep, and they had come not to plunder but to claim. They did not look human. The first scream broke from a deckhand near the galley. Another fell with a sound like canvas tearing, no cry, just a thud and stillness. Panic flickered, and in that moment Vash froze. From the helm he watched, mouth open, eyes wide, as the corsairs spilled onto the deck like nightmares given flesh. He saw one sailor fall, then another, both impaled before they could cry out. The third made a sound, a gasp, maybe a plea, but it was cut short, blood spattering across the rails. Still, Vash did not move. The wheel creaked beneath his grip. His legs refused command. All he could do was stare, locked in place, as the ship, the crew, was torn apart before him. Then something turned, not in the battle, but in him. A gear caught. A breath snapped back into his lungs, and Vash moved. His sword came free with a rasp of steel on leather. He vaulted from the helm to the lower deck, boots slamming onto blood-slick planks. No order, no thought, just motion, fire, resolve, rage. "Stand!" he bellowed, his voice cracking the fog like a cannon shot. "Hold the line!" "Fight, damn you!" He surged forward, blade drawn in a single breath. A corsair lunged at him, a tall, sinewy figure with a hooked glaive and blood-dipped armor. Vash met the strike mid-step, twisted under it, and drove his sword across the corsair's chest in a brutal arc. The thing shrieked an awful keening sound and stumbled back, ichor spilling across the deck. Then, with a hiss, it turned and threw itself overboard, vanishing into the sea without splash. The crew stared. "Blades up!" Vash roared, whirling on them. "They bleed! You hear me? They bleed!" A chorus of steel rang out. Whatever fear gripped the Ashen Grace's crew, it cracked beneath the weight of Vash's voice. And just in time. Another corsair landed near the mainmast, dragging a hooked saw meant for the thick cordage below the sails. He moved with purpose, ignoring the crew, heading straight for the mast like it was the throat of the ship. Vash saw. "Mainmast!" he shouted. "Defend it or we're dead in the water!" The deck shuddered under a fresh impact, claws and tails hammering against the hull. Then came the sound that froze every heart. Chewing. Gideon turned toward the mainmast and felt his stomach drop. The corsair had wrapped itself halfway around the mast, its tail coiled tight for grip. It was feeding, gnawing at the ship's heart with a mouthful of jagged, glassy fangs. Each bite sank deep into the wood, tearing out splinters soaked in salt and blood. The mast groaned like something alive in pain. Gideon was already moving. He snatched a boarding axe from the rack by the galley hatch, the heavy kind meant for cutting rope or bone. His boots hammered against the planks as he charged, lungs burning, vision tunneling. The corsair didn't even look down. It was too lost in its frenzy, teeth grinding, claws raking through the cordage. "Not my ship," Gideon snarled and swung. The axe bit deep, splitting scale and sinew with a crack like a cannon misfire. Black ichor sprayed across his face. The creature shrieked, twisting, tail whipping blindly. Gideon ripped the axe free, spun on the heel of his boot, and brought it down again, this time from over his head. The second strike buried the blade halfway through its torso, the impact jarring up his arms to his shoulders. The corsair's body arched, convulsed, then tore apart in a spray of brine and darkness. The upper half hit the deck with a wet thud, still twitching. The lower half slid limp from the mast and slumped into the scuppers. The axe stayed embedded in the wood, quivering. Gideon stood there for a breath, chest heaving, rain and ichor running in black streams down his jaw. "Stay dead," he muttered, and turned back to the fight. To starboard, Taran had seen it too late. One of the corsairs had coiled over the rail like a living rope, dragging a hooked chain behind it, jagged links clinking softly as it slithered toward the rigging. Its tail gouged the deck in long, deliberate arcs. Taran drew his knife. A curved sailor's blade sharpened to a sliver, and stepped into its path. The corsair turned. Its mask twitched once, sensing prey. Then it lunged. Taran dodged left, barely. Claws swept past, carving deep into the railing. He ducked again, slashed up with the knife, but the blade only scraped across wet, barnacled hide. The corsair struck back, tail whipping across his ribs. He cried out, staggered. Blood bloomed down his side. He turned and ran, through coiled ropes, past shattered barrels. The corsair chased, a blur of scales and motion, hissing with anticipation. Taran slipped between crates and crawled under a collapsed section of the boom. The creature followed, relentless. Claws shredded canvas, wood splintered. Then it stuck. Too big, too long. The narrow gap wedged it at the shoulders. It thrashed, snarling, tail whipping in rage. Taran spun, chest heaving. He saw his chance. One breath, then he leapt. The knife came down in a two-handed thrust, right through the exposed gill beneath its jaw. Ichor sprayed, thick and black, coating his arms. The corsair jerked once, convulsed, then sagged. Dead weight. Taran backed off, panting, hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Fast," he muttered, "but not smart." The air thickened with steam and salt and blood. The deck became a blur of motion, steel flashing, tails snapping, the stink of seawater and burnt oil thick enough to taste. And through it, a new sound. The crackle of Althea's saber as she drew it from its sheath, the steel ringing sharp in the stormlight. She stepped forward, her coat torn, blood on her face, but her eyes steady, voice like thunder on the open sea. "Hold your ground!" She raised her blade and met the nearest corsair head-on, parrying a strike that would have gutted her. Sparks flew, blood hissed against rain-slick steel, and her neck swing opened the thing's throat. "Hold!" she screamed again, standing in the center of the deck as her crew rallied around her. "For the Grace! For your lives!" And for the first time since the fog rose, the crew answered. The deck burned with violence. Althea moved like lightning, her saber clashing against coral-forged blades, sparks leaping from steel to salt-slick air. Taran, ribs still bleeding, wrenched a half-buried axe from the deck and charged with a hoarse shout. Gideon screamed something, half fury, half prayer, and flung himself from a barrel into the fray, crashing into a corsair with the weight of desperation. Even the deckhands, green and grizzled alike, rallied. They gripped pikes, poles, broken harpoons, whatever hadn't been nailed down. Blood turned the decks slick, screams sharpened the wind, and the Ashen Grace howled as she fought for her soul. The corsairs were fast, too fast. They struck with precision, spinning, coiling, their blades not made to maim but to end. Tails lashed like wet iron, masks glimmered with bioluminescent menace, but the crew held. Salt ran in their blood, and in their captain's eyes they saw a reason not to fall. Still, for every triumph there was loss, for every strike landed another missed, for every breath drawn in victory one was silenced. And they were not merely fighting, they were being hunted. And then, from the bow, the sea lifted. A new shape rose from the chaos, larger, slower, heavier. One of them, but more, twice the size of any corsair yet seen. Its spine jutted like reef stone. Its arms were long, gnarled things, barnacled and thick. Its mask was not coral, but carved from the skull of some leviathan, its fanged grin framed by strands of seaweed that hung like drowned hair. The monstrous corsair stepped onto the deck with slow, deliberate menace, water sluicing from its back in rivulets. It looked once, only once, and knew her. Althea. It moved forward. A deckhand screamed and lunged. The creature caught him mid-air, crushed his ribs with one hand, and flung the corpse aside. Another pirate swung a harpoon like a pike. The corsair ducked low, tail coiling under, then lashed up. The man was airborne for half a heartbeat before he hit the mainmast, neck broken. Then it stopped, 10 paces from Althea. No charge, no shriek, just silence. It stood still, water dripping from claws, head tilted. A challenge. Althea's breath came slow, her saber rose, the sea held its breath again. The crew froze, some dropped weapons, Taran's hand shook on the haft of his boarding axe. Even Gideon, whose courage had never known a ceiling, staggered back against the rail. "Mother of stars," someone muttered, "that's a sea god's curse." From the helm Vash saw it, the creature towering and still, staring down Althea like judgment carved from the sea itself. He moved to help, but 2 corsairs intercepted him, slipping from the mist like knives. Their blades hissed through the rain as they struck. Vash snarled, steel meeting steel, driving one back with a brutal riposte before turning to block the other. He couldn't reach her. Not yet. Taran did. Bleeding, bruised, ribs cracked from his earlier fight, he let out a raw, defiant roar and charged the towering corsair with knife raised high. It didn't even flinch. The creature caught Taran by the face mid-leap, lifting him as easily as one might lift a rag doll. There was a sickening pause, then it flung him across the deck. Taran crashed into the gunwale with a sound that broke ribs and quieted breath. "Taran!" Althea turned, heart in her throat. She twisted her head toward Gideon, eyes blazing. "Go!" "Check him." Gideon hesitated, but only for a breath. He dashed across the deck toward Taran, only to be met by a knot of corsairs. They closed in with blades drawn, forcing him into a tight, desperate defense, shouting curses and prayers as he fought to reach his fallen friend. Althea turned back. The creature had not moved. It stood over her saber, tail curling like a whip, watching. She bared her teeth and ran. The rain thickened, battering the deck in slanted sheets. Her boots splashed through blood and brine. She screamed, not out of fear but fury, and brought her blade up high. The creature caught her swing with one clawed hand, and she struck again and again. It stepped back once, twice, letting her flail. Then it moved. The backhand sent her flying. Her saber spun from her grip, clattering across the planks. She slammed into a cluster of barrels, wood splintering around her, breath knocked clean from her lungs. She struggled up. The monster advanced, slow, savouring. Nearby, a fallen corsair's trident glinted. She lunged for it, grabbed it, and turned in a single desperate motion, thrusting with all her weight. The creature snatched it from her like it was a toy. With its other hand, it grabbed her by the throat and slammed her down, hard, onto the deck. The trident clattered beside her, just out of reach. Her limbs kicked, then faltered. Pinned. The rain fell harder, deafening. It leaned close, mask inches from her face. When it spoke, the voice was not a roar, but a whisper that drowned out the sea. "You are nothing." The weight pressed harder. "You will die knowing your crew dies with you." It raised its arm, claws spread for the final blow. Althea couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch death fall. And then Silas opened his eyes. The corsair reared above her, trident raised high, poised like a thunderclap caught between heartbeats. Althea saw the blow coming. There was no time to block, no space to dodge. Her feet were slick with blood, hers, someone else's. She couldn't tell. The mast loomed just behind her, wounded and groaning with the strain of battle, and she knew somehow that if she fell here, the ship would follow. She looked up. The raindrops seemed to slow, suspended in the air like falling stars. The clash of steel, the screams, the groaning wood, all of it faded as if the world itself held its breath. In that stillness, beneath a sky painted in stormlight, Althea waited for death to fall. The moment stretched, a breath too long, a silence too deep. Somewhere behind her Vash screamed, but the sound was distant, as if underwater. He gripped the sword with white-knuckled fury, a curse half-formed on his lips. Too slow. He should have reached her. He should have stopped this. Not far off, Gideon struggled upright, one eye bloodied shut, the other wide with horror. His hand scrabbled uselessly across the planks, searching for the dagger he'd dropped. He wasn't laughing now. There was no grin left. Only the bitter, sinking knowledge. I wasn't strong enough. Taran lay crumpled where he'd landed, one leg twisted beneath him, blood leaking from a gash along his temple. His knife was still in hand, but limp. His chest rose barely, each breath shallow, wet. He gasped once, eyes fluttering but couldn't rise. The fight had been ripped from him in a single brutal motion. He was a navigator, meant to guide them through storm and sea, but now he could only lie there broken, while the tide turned red around him. And Althea, locked beneath the trident's descent, did not flinch. Her thoughts did not scream. They quieted, not peace, but surrender, not fear, but acceptance. If this was where the tide ended, so be it. But then something shifted. Below decks, the last lantern flickered blue. The fever broke like a cracked shell. Silas opened his eyes. The bunk beneath him was empty before the flame could finish dying. No sound, no flash, just absence. On the deck, the trident began to fall. It never struck. Instead, a blade bloomed from the corsair's neck, silent, sudden, precise. It froze mid-motion, a choked hiss escaping its throat. Behind it stood Silas. His face was unreadable, eyes rimmed in shadow, his presence impossibly still. He did not speak, he did not breathe. Then he vanished again, as if darkness itself had swallowed him whole. The deck erupted, not in noise, not at first, but in motion, in black. Shadows bloomed from nowhere, tendrils of smoke that peeled across the deck like living ink, moving too fast for the eye to follow. They curled up masts, slid along the planks, burst like lashes of void where no light had been before. And from within them, Silas. He stepped out of one tendril mid-turn, blade already thrusting, catching a corsair low in the side. It screamed, twisted, lashed out too slow. Silas was already gone. Another tendril sparked to life near the helm. He emerged again, this time in a spin, slashing up through the ribs of a second corsair that had barely turned its head. Green-black blood sprayed across the deck. The creature staggered, but Silas had vanished before it fell. Gideon stared, jaw slack. Vash didn't blink, eyes tracking the smoke with soldier's instinct and failing. Even Althea, heart still hammering in the aftermath of near death, stood frozen, not in fear, but in awe. Another corsair, this one broader, armoured in polished scale, wheeled as a shadow snapped to form behind it. It turned just in time. Steel met steel. Sparks flew. For a moment the deck rang with clean blade music. Silas struck high, vanished, appeared behind. The corsair twisted, parried, tail snapping low. Silas vaulted it. They clashed again, once, twice, shadows curling at their feet like boiling oil. But the corsair faltered. Silas did not. In a final blur of black he appeared behind its guard and drove both blades through its back in a cross, then vanished before the body hit the planks. A beat of silence. Then, one by one, the corsairs still remaining, the few who had survived Vash and the others, turned and fled. One dove into the sea. Another hissed a curse in a tongue older than storms and vanished into the fog. Silas reappeared near the mast, knees giving way. He fell hard to the deck, one hand catching himself, the other still gripping his blade. The smoke faded. He was just a boy again, pale, shaking, breath coming in shallow bursts. The fever was gone, but something colder had taken its place. No one moved. They simply stared, listening to the echo of the storm that had passed, but left none of them untouched. The deck was quiet in that strange, unsettled way, like the sea had just remembered it was watching. Wreckage sprawled from bow to stern. The aftermath of the storm wasn't thunder or wind, but silence, thick and echoing, broken only by the soft crack of sails, the moan of wounded timbers. Blood had turned the planks slick. Rain thinned it now, washing it into the scuppers in long crimson trails. The corsair bodies were already cooling, some still twitched in the reflex of death. Crewmen lay where they'd fallen, too many. Those who stood did so unsteadily with wounds that would scar if they healed at all. The Ashen Grace floated, but she was bleeding. Althea stood motionless in the centre of it all, her sabre dangling from one hand, her coat torn and heavy with rain. Her hair clung to her face. Her legs felt hollow, her heart louder than the sea. Then she saw him. Silas. He lay crumpled near the mast, not far from where the coffer was still lashed tight, its blindfolded sun sigil soaked and smeared. His body was still, a smear of shadow around him, like something had burned into the wood and then vanished. His sword was gone. His hands limp. His face turned slightly to the side, rain striking his cheek in steady rhythm. She dropped the sabre. She didn't remember moving, only the sudden awareness of being on her knees, crawling toward him. Her palms slipped on the blood-slicked deck. Her breath came in gasps, more sob than air. "Silas," she whispered. "Silas." He didn't respond. She gathered him to her gently, reverently, slipping one arm beneath his shoulders, cradling his head in her lap. His skin was cold, damp with sweat, or seawater or shadow. For a moment she thought he was gone. Then he breathed, soft, shallow, but there. A flicker of life. His lips parted in a sigh no louder than the falling rain. His chest rose and fell like a tide, trying to remember the rhythm of the shore. Althea bowed her head to his, her hands cupping his face, thumbs brushing the salt and dirt from his skin. And she wept, not with sobs, not loudly, but with the weight of what could have been and what still might come. Tears spilled freely, silently, mingling with the rain. She didn't care who saw. She didn't care that her crew bled, that the ship listed slightly to starboard, that the sea still felt full of watching eyes. She had thought him lost, and now he wasn't. Behind her the crew moved with ghost-like care. Vash limped back to the wheel, soaked and bleeding but upright. He spared Althea and Silas one long look, unreadable, then set his hands to the helm. The Ashen Grace needed a hand, and he was the last one standing. Taran dragged himself upright near the gunwale, his arm bandaged in cloth-soaked dark. His eyes scanned the rigging, the damage, the wounded. Every breath was pain, but he kept moving. He had to. He was a navigator. If they didn't steer now, they'd drift, and drifting meant death. Gideon sat against the portside rail, head tipped back, face to the sky, eyes closed. Rain traced lines down his blood-streaked cheeks. One hand rested on a dented cutlass. The other clutched his ribs where a corsair had nearly torn him open. He wasn't smiling. Not now. Just breathing. Still breathing. The Ashen Grace creaked, not in agony, but like a woman waking from a bad dream. She was broken but not gone. Her bones ached. Her sails flapped in ribbons. Her lanterns hung shattered, but she floated. She answered, and she would carry them still. The rain thickened, cold and clean. It washed over the dead. It cooled the scorched deck. It whispered down from the rigging and sang against the hull. The sea had taken its toll, but it had not claimed them all. Not yet. The coffer at the mast sat still, its iron bands sweating, as if remembering the hands that had forged them. No one touched it. No one spoke its name. It had drawn attention from the deep, and what stirred might not sleep again. Above them, the fog parted just enough for a sliver of moonlight to pierce through, silver and cold, a blade drawn too late to stop the bleeding. It lit the deck in ghostlight, casting long shadows across the ruin. It found Silas in Althea's lap and lingered there. She stroked his hair once, gently. His breath came again, shallow, real. "We're still here," she whispered. Not to him, not really. To the ship, to the sea, to whatever watched in the fog. "We're still here." The Ashen Grace turned, slowly, reluctantly, on tattered sails and cracked bones, south by west, toward Velvenreach, toward uncertain harbour, and as the last of the moonlight slipped behind the fog, the sea held its breath.